The Smurl family thought they were running late for church until the kitchen light ripped from the ceiling and slammed onto one of their daughters.
2 minutes behind already.
The roast will be fine. Just keep it low.
That moment would mark the start of one of America's most chilling hauntings, and it didn't look anything like the movies. It's a quiet morning in West Pittston, Pennsylvania. It's an old neighborhood, nothing fancy, a white duplex on Chase Street, just like 100 others. Inside, Jack and Janet Smurl tried to wrangle 4 daughters, Dawn, Heather, and the twins Shannon and Karen, and their German shepherd Simon. On the other side of the duplex are Jack's parents, John and Mary. Life's busy, it's loud, it's cluttered. Dinner's at a table that barely fits. Girls scream about bathroom time, TV up so high you wonder how anyone hears anything. Nothing about this place says haunted house. But right there's where the trouble starts. And it's where every movie you've ever seen leads you wrong. In a film, you'd get doors slamming, shadows crawling across the ceiling. In real life, it's more subdued. It's a lamp that doesn't stay off and gets blamed on a bad switch. It's bangs inside the walls. Must be the pipes, right? Old house, after all. Appliances break, you buy another one, curse the cheap parts that you got. And because it's spread out, weeks, even months apart, nobody keeps score. Who would? Until one day, you can't pretend anymore. That day, the day of Heather's confirmation, the whole family is packed into the kitchen, racing to get out the door for church. That's when, out of nowhere, the big fluorescent light fixture drops straight down, gouges the fridge, and crashes into one of the twins. Not a slow sag, not one side loose, it just falls, dead weight. Jack's dad, John, takes a look. This guy could fix anything. He prided himself on it. He leans in, he checks out where the light was bolted, and says, "That's not how things fall. Not like this." Make it make sense, right? Light fixtures just don't jump off of ceilings. Suddenly, all those normal frustrations don't feel so normal anymore. Welcome to Beach House 34. I'm your host, Christine Worth. And this is the story of the Smurl family and the home that turned their faith into a fight to survive. To understand how this haunting really began, we have to go back to 1972, to Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and the Agnes flood. This wasn't just a bad storm or a few basements that got underwater. Agnes ripped through families, through businesses, entire neighborhoods. More than 200,000 people were left with nothing. For the Smurls, like so many others, it meant starting over from scratch. They landed in West Pittston the next year, October of 1973. And what they found was a tired old duplex on Chase Street. It was built in the late 1800s. It was a little creaky, little crooked, but solid. And for a family who'd lost nearly everything, that house just looked like hope. A few months later, Jack's parents, John and Mary, moved in next door. So now you've got 3 generations under one roof. Jack and Janet, their 4 daughters, Dawn, Heather, and the twins, Shannon and Karen, and their German shepherd, Simon. Next door, the grandparents. It was loud, it was crowded and chaotic, but it was home. Jack threw himself into repairs, patching pipes, fixing the wiring, trying to put some kind of normalcy back together, piece by piece. Janet juggled the 4 girls, school lunches, laundry that never seemed to end. The house was alive with the sounds of family life, like kids yelling about bathroom time. The TV turned up too loud, Simon darting underfoot during dinner. It wasn't perfect, but it was the kind of busy, messy, beautiful, normal that they'd been craving. And yet, even in those early months, the house didn't always feel right. The kitchen light flickered when nobody touched it. Pipes burst without warning. The refrigerator clanked and groaned like it had some kind of grudge. And sometimes Janet caught a whiff of sulfur, sharp and chemical, but it was gone before she could call anyone else in to smell it. Still, they brushed it off, old household problems. After what they'd been through, a few quirks weren't enough to complain about. Jack fixed what he could. Janet adjusted to the rest. That's what families do when they're trying to move forward. They don't dwell, they just keep going. Nobody called it haunted. Who would? The odd things that happened came weeks, sometimes months apart. It was easier to chalk things up to bad wiring, cheap parts, or just the normal chaos of life with 4 kids. But years later, looking back, the Smurls would remember that something in the air had shifted even then. That feeling of the house pressing in around them, the weight of it, showed up long before anyone could put words to what was really happening. But what they couldn't see yet, the first cracks in reality had already started. Because this story doesn't begin with screams in the dark. It's not like you see in the movies. It begins with the family rebuilding, with hope and the slow creeping realization that something in their new home wasn't as ordinary as it seemed. What followed that hopeful move wasn't chaos. Not at first. It was slow. So slow that nobody in the Smurl family even realized it was happening. At the first few months, they felt ordinary. Old house, ordinary. Lights flickered, pipes made noise, the fridge moaned. Jack, practical as ever, blamed the wiring, bad parts. Nothing that a few trips to the hardware store couldn't fix. Very normal. After everything they'd survived in the flood, this was doable. They weren't scared, they were just tired. Tired of repairs, tired of the noise, tired of trying to make something old feel new again. But then the weirdness started to stack. Not in a rush, but in fragments, spaced out just far enough that you couldn't really connect the dots. Remember that smell that Janet would catch sometimes, that sharp chemical smell like sulfur? Sometimes it smelled like rotten eggs. Sometimes this lasted for hours, and sometimes it was gone in seconds. Janet would flip off a lamp, come back later, and it would be turned back on again. Once it happened 6 times in one day, and she started to wonder if she was just losing track of herself. Things began to disappear as well. Little things. A hairbrush, a towel, Janet's favorite earrings. They were here one day, gone the next. She'd tear the house apart, come up empty, and then days later, they'd turn up somewhere impossible. Nothing added up, but in a house full of kids, everything has an explanation, if you want one badly enough. Then Jack's medical bracelet went missing. He swore he'd set it on the counter before a shower. During a shower, he heard 3 sharp knocks and this metallic ting. And afterward, it was gone. He tore the bathroom apart. Nothing. Across the duplex, his parents were dealing with their own issues. Clothes were out of place. Food began to vanish. Utensils turned up where they didn't belong. Little things, but little things that shouldn't be moving on their own. Whatever this was, it wasn't just happening to Janet anymore. The family's German Shepherd, Simon, started acting strange too. He'd bark at empty rooms or refuse to go upstairs. His eyes locked on something that no one else could see. Just another thing that didn't make sense. So they just added it to this growing list. Doors that the family swore were locked were found standing wide open. And then came the knocking, always in threes. At first, it was soft, the kind of sound that you could blame on the pipes or settling wood. But it followed Janet from room to room, sometimes from the walls, sometimes the ceiling. Even John, Jack's dad, who's nearly deaf, woke up one night to pounding so loud it rattled his bed frame. Nobody talked about it out loud, but they all heard it. The atmosphere began to change. Janet couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, especially at night. She once said that it felt like the house was watching her back, just waiting. Can you even imagine trying to sleep through that? She'd pick up her pace through the hallways and skip dark corners. Kind of like, you know that feeling when you flip off the basement light and suddenly you're sprinting like something's chasing you? Yeah. Now imagine it's not just the basement, that's your house. But if missing objects mess with your sanity, imagine hearing your own name when no one's home. It happened once. Janet heard her name. It was faint, but very distinct, coming from upstairs when she was alone in the house. She went to check. Nothing was there. Just one more thing that she couldn't explain, or maybe didn't want to. Weeks of quiet would go by, and everyone would breathe again. Then another knock, another missing thing, another cold draft from nowhere. That's what made it so hard to name. There were no big scares, no single moments of panic, just hundreds of small things spaced far enough apart to make you question your own mind. This was the real haunting. Not ghosts in the dark, but the slow erosion of certainty. The moment that you stop trusting what you see, what you hear, and even what you remember. If there's one thing that makes a house feel like home, it's the little stuff, the things you touch every day without even thinking about it. The earrings on the nightstand, the towel that was folded just right, the dog asleep by the bed. These tiny familiar details are what tell you you're safe. But in the Smurl house, these small things started telling a different story. Let's talk about Janet's favorite earrings. Every night before she went to bed, she took them off and she put them right there on her nightstand. One morning, they were just gone. Of course, the first thing you do, right, is ask your daughters, hey, did you take my earrings? Did you borrow my earrings? When all of that failed, she searched everywhere, drawers, carpets. She even emptied the vacuum. Nothing. It wasn't until days later that she happened to open up Jack's, her husband's jewelry box, one that was rarely touched. And there they were, propped upright, covered in this chalky residue that she had to scrape away with her fingernail. Okay, how do you even process that? Do you laugh? Do you cry? Do you just pretend it didn't happen? She didn't say a word because really, what do you say? In a house full of kids, there's always a logical explanation. Except the logic never held for long. If you're into real-life hauntings that don't play out like in the movies, hit subscribe, because this one's just getting darker. The disappearances kept coming. Towels, shirts, even Heather's rosary. They'd vanish for days, sometimes weeks, and then reappear exactly where they'd started. Sometimes they were folded, arranged. Mary's favorite slacks went missing, then returned, pressed, and folded. Every spoon in her kitchen disappeared one day, only to reappear a few at a time, like someone was rationing her sanity. And then there was Jack's medical bracelet. It never came back. Months later, at a campground, Janet happened to lose those same earrings again. She had been so afraid to misplace them that she had slept with them in. In the morning, they were gone. After hours of searching at a campsite, no less, she gave up and started washing the breakfast dishes at the outdoor sink. When she pulled her hands from the water, both earrings were slipped onto her fingers, like rings. And if that wasn't unnerving enough, this thing was just warming up. The message was really clear. And nothing you think you control is really yours, not even your own peace of mind. Simon, the German Shepherd, began showing up in locked rooms. Sometimes he'd be trembling, his eyes fixed on a corner that looked empty. Other times he'd howl in his sleep, this deep, bone-shaking sound that sent Janet running, only to find him unresponsive, trapped in some nightmare. Doors were left wide open when Janet knew that she'd locked them. Keys vanished and reappeared in odd places. It was as if the house itself was just messing with them, shifting things just enough to make them doubt themselves. People on the outside said the same thing they always say: stress, distraction, forgetfulness. But the Smurls knew better. Objects moved by accident, yes, but not like this. Not this often and not this precise. And be honest, would you stay in that house or burn it down and run? And if you thought objects moving was strange, imagine the house learning your voice. The first time that Janet heard her name, she was in the basement folding laundry. The house was locked up tight. The kids were at school. It was quiet. Then, clear as a bell, a woman's voice called from upstairs. "Janet, Janet." She called back, "Be right there." But when she reached the top of the stairs, the house was empty. That's when she felt it. The realization that she wasn't imagining things, but she couldn't explain them either. She tried to brush it off, but these voices didn't stop. She'd hear "Mom" in one of her daughter's voices, even when the girls weren't home. And Jack would swear that he heard Janet calling from another room, only to find that she had been next door with his parents. Then came the arguments. John and Mary heard shouting from Jack and Janet's side of the duplex, curses that neither couple ever used. Now, Jack and Janet heard the same thing in reverse. And when they finally compared notes, they realized it wasn't them. It was the house. That's the kind of moment that breaks your brain a little. Who do you trust? Your memory or the fear? That's when things started to get mean. At night, Jack and Janet would hear muffled conversations. They would hear a man's voice and a woman's voice from the other side of the duplex. But when they asked John and Mary about it, they insisted they hadn't been talking. They hadn't said a word. The voices also didn't stay in one place. They would follow family members from room to room. Sometimes Janet would hear her name called from behind her, only to spin around to nothing. Other times it came from the walls themselves. And always, the three knocks followed. The air in the house began to change too. It felt heavier, like the moment before a thunderstorm, except the storm never came. The house, over time, over months, over years, had found a way to isolate them, not with fear, but with doubt. And that's what people don't understand about real hauntings. They don't just scare you. They dismantle the trust that keeps you human. And for the Smurls, that was only the beginning. By 1982, the tone in the Smurl house had shifted considerably. The strangeness wasn't random anymore. It wasn't hiding. It was coordinated, like the house had learned what scared them the most. The pounding came back, but louder now. Not little knocks. These were real, body-shaking blows that rattled the walls and the ceilings. And always 3 at a time. So the family started to write everything down, the times, the dates, the sounds, just to prove that they weren't imagining it. When the pounding did stop, the air grew thick and still. Janet would describe it as heavy, like the air before lightning hits. Then came the shadows. Grandma Mary was in her part of the duplex, watching TV, when a black shape, low to the ground, crossed her living room floor. There was no head, no tail, just a patch of darkness the size of a small dog, gliding fast toward the couch. It went underneath the couch, and the space was already too small for anything living. She stared for a long time, waiting for this thing to come out. It never did. On the other side of the duplex, Jack and Janet caught sight of something bigger, shadows that didn't belong to anything. They slid down the walls and glided through the hallways. Once, Jack said that he saw one move across the ceiling. At first, they told themselves they're just seeing things. Don't we all, right? And just when they thought that things couldn't get any weirder, closet doors started slamming open and shut on their own. Not slowly, but fast and impossible. Janet would yell for it to stop. Can you imagine yelling at empty air and realizing it listens? Because sometimes it did stop. Sometimes it waited until she turned away and it started again. Then one night there was a crash. Shannon, one of the twins, ended up at the bottom of the stairs. She was dazed and had absolutely no memory of falling. Janet would wake up with bruises she couldn't explain. She would feel cold fingers wrap around her ankles and pull. And then again, there'd be nothing but silence. Now, it was no longer weeks or months between incidents. It was days, sometimes hours. By 1983, the attacks started to come in bursts. The slamming doors, the sulfur smells, the bruises, the nightmares. Then nothing, then something worse. It was as if the house was testing them, seeing how much fear they could stand before they broke. And the truth is, it was close. By 1985, that was the life inside the Smurl duplex. The noises were one thing. The scratches, the bruises, and the assaults were another. They had gone to priests. They tried holy water, prayers, logic. Nothing changed. And then Janet made a call she never wanted to make. To Ed and Lorraine Warren, the Connecticut demonologists, who were made famous after the Amityville case. She had seen them on television months earlier and had kept their number tucked into her Bible, just in case. When she finally called, she said, "We don't know where else to turn." The Warrens then agreed to visit, and they brought recording equipment, cameras, holy water. Lorraine claimed that she felt a black negative presence before she even walked inside. Ed set up recorders that, according to them, captured growls, raps, and what he described as a voice mocking prayer. They told the Smurls that this was not a typical haunting. It was inhuman. Something, they said, that fed on fear. Over the next 2 years, the Warrens would visit repeatedly. They brought priests. They performed blessings. They urged the Diocese of Scranton to authorize an exorcism. But church officials, they were cautious. They wanted proof. One priest performed a minor rite of exorcism in 1986, but the activity continued. Another tried a solemn exorcism the following year. Still, the banging, the shadows, and the assaults all returned. For brief stretches of time, the house would get quiet for days, sometimes weeks. But Janet said it never felt peaceful. It felt like the quiet was watching her back. The Warrens documented their evidence, but the church didn't confirm possession. And the Smurls, they were running out of hope. They stopped sleeping. Jack lost weight. Janet began to faint from exhaustion. And the neighbors started talking. And people noticed the Warrens' car parked outside. Reporters started to ask questions, and, priests are coming and going out of this duplex. Soon, the story that had been confined to just those walls was out, and the media wanted in. By 1986, the haunting wasn't just local gossip. It was a national story. The Smurls haunting made the Wilkes-Barre Times Leader, then the Associated Press, then television. Cameras showed up on their front lawn. Neighbors stared, curious. And the family's private hell became a public spectacle. Reporters called it everything from the West Pittston demon case to the haunted duplex. And skeptics accused the family of seeking attention. The Smurls said that they only went public after years of silence, hoping that the exposure might pressure the church to act. And in August of 1986, the diocese confirmed that priests had performed several exorcisms, but said that the results were inconclusive. And that's church speak for nothing changed. By 1987, the family finally left Chase Street. They moved back to Wilkes-Barre, hoping the distance might mean some peace. And for a time it did. The new house stayed quiet until small noises returned. A thump in the attic and a whisper in the hallway. The Warrens claimed that the entity had followed them, and the Smurls tried one final exorcism with church approval. After that, by most accounts, the activity subsided. But subside doesn't mean disappear. Even years later, Janet told interviewers she'd wake in the night expecting to hear knocks or voices. She called it living hunted. The Warrens published the Smurl story in 1988's book called The Haunted, One Family's Nightmare, which the Smurls cooperated on. Not to sensationalize, but to document what they believe really happened. And in 1991, a TV movie followed. And just like that, their trauma became entertainment. For the most part, the family stayed very private afterwards. Jack passed away in 2017, Janet in 2019. Their daughters rarely speak publicly, but one told a reporter that her parents never lied. They just wanted peace. You'd think silence means safety. For the Smurls, it meant suspicion. After years of pounding, whispers, and humiliation, peace didn't feel peaceful. It felt temporary. They lost neighbors. They lost their privacy and faith in the institutions that were supposed to protect them. Even after the move to Wilkes-Barre, Janet says she couldn't sleep through quiet nights. Every creak sounded like a warning. Every silence felt like the house was just getting ready all over again. The Smurls were not characters in a horror movie. They were parents trying to protect their children in a home that stopped feeling like one. If this story stuck with you, that's good. It should. The Smurl family's haunting wasn't about monsters in the dark. It was about people trying to survive when no one believed them. And if that hits you the way it hits me, hit subscribe so that you don't miss what's coming next. I'd like to know what you think in the comments. Would you have stayed and fought for your home? Do you think it was just the home? Would you have packed up, never looked back, maybe burned it down? I'm curious. Thank you all so much for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you to all of our brand new subscribers. We're so happy to have you here. We'll be back next week with another paranormal story because it is Halloween season after all, right? I'm Christine, and this is Beach House 34. See you next time.